As most of you will be aware of by now, the British are going to have a referendum on whether or not to leave the EU in about 1 month. A lot of arguments have already been put forth to whether or not they should vote to leave or vote to stay. However, there is one argument that I think has not been talked about enough, or at least I'm not aware of it. This is the argument I want to bring forth in this video. You see, most of the talk has been about money. Will you be richer? Will you be poorer? But I will say that this is not the only important factor, and believe me, I'm not going to talk about immigration either here. I think that if you want to decide whether you want to stay within the European Union or not, you will have to look at the future of the European Union. And to do this, as Churchill says, we might want to find a country in the past, or a situation in the past that has been somewhat similar. And going through, I actually think I found one. Europe, here depicted as its 28 member states, actually shares some commonalities with the United States, here depicted as its 50 member states and their respective flags. What commonalities are that? Well, they're both sort of federations, and much like Europe, actually, the United States was founded as a country with a large amount of states' rights. The states, in fact, had most of the legislative power and had probably more independence from the federal law than European states have today, or had when they signed into the European Union. So I think it is not wrong to compare the two, and to take warning in the fact that the US federal government has now ballooned into the largest government in the world, and has effectively annihilated all the states' rights. The independent, or formerly mostly independent states in the United States can no longer decide for their own, but will have to go mostly with what the federal government has to say. I fear in Europe there might be a similar fate waiting for us. Two of the founding fathers of the European Union, Jean Monnet, pictured on the left, and Robert Schuman, pictured on the right, had the vision of a federal Europe. A European Federation, or United States of Europe, whatever you want to call it. Funnily enough, they shared this vision with Winston Churchill, who wanted Europe to be like the United States. But after, in 1954, the European defense community was struck down by the French because the British did not want to join that common military project, and the French didn't want to be left alone with the Germans in it. They had to think of a different approach, and Jean Monnet actually came up with one. It is now being referred to as the Monnet method, or the community method in the English language. It basically states that every time there's a new issue that is collectively addressed by the states, it will be added to the agenda of the European bureaucracy, basically establishing a new bureaucracy for every new agenda that is set. This is also called the spillover effect, and I'm sorry I have to use the parallel, but it basically says that you infect one area that is of low public concern or not very high on the radar. Let's take fishing, agriculture. Let's throw in some coal and steel for good measure. And you build a European supranational or overnational authority, bureaucracy, that now gets to regulate that sector. Due to the third of the three factors we're going to talk about in a minute, it is going to grasp most of the power in that area and entrench very deeply. So it will be almost impossible to get away, especially not if you continue to be a member of the European Union, because there will always be some special interests, like the French with the agriculture, that will want it to stay. And just, because you don't want to throw away all the gifts you've been given by the European Union, you will have to accept its existence. But the first part of spillover actually is the broadening of European competence, of the broadening of the competence and bureaucracies, the amount of bureaucracies that one gets. You see, every time a new issue is added to the agenda, there will be a new sector that will come under heavy pressure of being legislated now by the European Union instead of the individual states. Have you heard recently all the talk about a European solution in the migrant crisis? Well, this might very well be the precursor to a United European Immigration Office. Will you hear soon about maybe educational problems with, the young kids or even the migrants, whatever? They're not learning our language well. we might have a European solution for that. Have you heard about, oh, the NHS kind of failed? Well, now we need a European health service because you can't possibly do it on a local level, right? This spillover means that from areas where the European bureaucracy has already been entrenched, it will switch over to other areas that have not yet been captured by the bureaucracy, and it will start spreading its seeds, so to say, in that direction. The second area of integration of the European Union into your everyday life is a territorial one. It's the most obvious one, the one we always see. Poland has just joined the European Union. Turkey has just joined. Russia, oh wait, no, they're not. But you know what I mean. The EU 28 is 28 because it has, over the course of history, constantly widened. Croatia has now joined, and I think it's only a matter of time until Serbia is allowed to join, if by then they still want to. Last but not least, and actually probably most importantly, there's a deepening of competences, which means that more and more power will be handed over to a supranational organization until you get a European health service that has all the power, and until organizations, let's say the NHS, won't exist anymore or will just fulfill the orders from the European bureaucracy. This, to me, is very worrying. Because one of the downsides of the Monet method is that since there are not 12 people in the back room planning it, since it is somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of type, where the self-interests of politicians, bureaucracies, and special interest groups drive the European Union into that direction, because for them individually it is always rational to ask for more bureaucracy, to ask for more regulation, and almost never rational to ask for less, or to actually act to get less. And this will mean that we will get a federal Europe, but we will not get it as in we will just found a federation, because that has historically not worked. We will get something that is much bigger and much more bloated and much more probably, and I dare say cancerous, than the thing it used to be. Because in the Monet method, it might be a slow step-by-step process. It might be we take one step at a time, we go slowly, we take it from the feet upward, not from the head downward. This will mean that there is no real goal to it and there's no real end. There's no one to say this is how far we want to go. It will just continue going. I think the difference for British people in whether or not they want to stay within the European Union is whether or not you actually have a relevant voice in how much regulation is the right amount or how much regulation should be the right amount. The European Union, due to its size, necessarily makes one-size-fits-all solutions. There's little we can change about that, and all a country can do is get one of the about 10 billion exceptions to that. However, this cannot stand forever, and I am of the opinion that this ship is actually sinking. I think it might soon be too late. Because you see, the southern states in the United States, to go back to that parallel, did not like the economic policies from the North. They did not like the economic policies from Washington because the North was heavily industrialized and the South was very agricultural. Washington favored the North because there were more people living there, so they had more power in the vote in voting presidents. Most of the presidents were from the North. Since they knew they would be outvoted almost every time, they tried to leave. And what happened to this country where the states' rights were incredibly high, and back then, before the civil wars, the states still had more rights than the European member states have today, was that effectively the federal government shut the door for anyone ever leaving. Do not mistake, the US today is still about 6 different countries, maybe even more. People there are not the same between New York, California, and Denver, or Wichita, Kansas, or St. Louis, Missouri. People are not the same, and people on the east and west coast on this, Democrat bloc, whether or not you agree with their policies, but they are forcing their policies onto much of the rest of the nation simply by outvoting them. I think that this might be the last chance you have to leave the European Union without a civil war. This is a decision you have to make for yourself. I'm German, I'm not allowed to vote here. I would recommend you do. I would recommend you vote at all because this is a conscious decision. And I would recommend you vote on leave, because if I got the vote for Germany, I would be voting yes to leave. I fear that as a German, I'm bound to sink with this ship. But you don't have to. You really don't have to. Whether you will be richer or poorer, it doesn't really matter. Because I think that in the long run, you will be freer. And be a bit poorer to be free? Or give up your independence for security, your freedom for security, as the American patriot said. If you give up your freedom for security, you will lose both. I think it might actually be economically good for the United Kingdoms, but most certainly I would take the hit, and I hope you do. And if you don't, that is totally fine. It is not my decision to make, it is yours. If you found any value in this video, please do share. Please do like or dislike if you didn't like it. If you think I had something wrong here, if you want to maybe add your thoughts to it, you can of course write in the comments, but you can also contact us on Twitter or Facebook. I am somewhat capable of speaking the English language. I hope that came through here. And if you are capable of speaking the German language, or at least listening to it, you can certainly subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be bringing out German content every Thursday, 1400 hours. And we will be bringing out English videos every now and then to maybe see if other Europeans, non-English speaking Europeans, are interested in this too. Other than that, I thank you very much for your patience, and I wish you a wonderful, wonderful, blissful day.